Now we've seen a lot of what the motion editor can do, but there's still one more thing I want to try with it before we finish this chapter out, and that is creating keyframes directly inside of the motion editor panel. So far, we've used it to change easing, we've used it to change existing values, and simply to see which keyframes have been set by things like our presets. But now I want to go in and actually add some keyframes and some changes. I'd like to take this animation and flip it around a little bit. Presets can always be edited, so we can just use it as a starting animation. And what I'd like to do is have the ball arc through the air, but instead of continuing on in this direction, I'd like it to bounce off the backboard, go through the hoop, and then bounce back off the stage to the left. Now let's get things started by switching over to our selection tool. We're going to make sure we have our tween selected, and I'm going to bring up the motion editor panel. We'll double click. And just to make sure that we're seeing all of it, I'm going to make sure that I pull off to the right here, and we're seeing all 75 frames of our animation. Now I'd like to focus on the X area here. We can see that our object starts off the left-hand side of the stage because my starting X value is less than 0, and then it increases as the object moves off to the right-hand side, continuing on as it goes off the right-hand edge of the stage. Now it would help if I could actually see my stage at this point, so let me close my timeline down. And let me adjust things a little bit so that I've got a little bit more view. And now we can see our basketball actually moving towards the basket. Now somewhere right in here, I'd actually like the ball to bounce off the backboard. So that means we're going to need a keyframe right in here. We haven't messed with keyframes too much, but we actually have a control specifically set aside for that. And that's these little arrows with the diamond in the middle. What the program will do is if you use the arrows, it'll actually move the playhead automatically to wherever the last or next keyframe is. So if I click this arrow, it's going to go all the way to the end because we don't have any keyframes in between. When we're at a keyframe location, we can see that the little diamond lights up in the middle. And that indicates that we're sitting right on top of that keyframe. We can use that control right here. I'm going to move my playhead back to where we want to add our keyframe. Let's say right about in there. I'm not being too precise. I can add a keyframe just by clicking in that diamond area. You can see a keyframe appears. Now, since our motion path is one big thing, even though we've got X, Y, and Z, we've actually created a keyframe on all of our different layers here. As usual, we can change things at our keyframe, and what I'd really like to change is the direction. I'd like for our ball to stop moving forward in an X direction and turn around and move the other way. Now we have more control than you think at these points. These are actually Bezier curves. They've got handles, we can drag on them, and they work just like other vectors. One other thing that I can do is in the right-click menu. If I go back to this point that we just created and I right-click on it, you can see that we can control this keyframe in a very delicate way. We can decide if it's going to be a corner point or a smooth point or smooth left and right. Now right now it's a smooth point. And that's keeping my X direction going up smoothly along this curve. But I'm going to switch it out to a corner point. Now I mentioned before that I'd like to have my basketball move the other direction. So I'm going to grab the keyframe we have at the end here, and I'm just going to move it around directly in the timeline. Now you can see that our corner here makes a sharp change. And actually on the screen we can see that the basketball is going to make a bounce going from left to right. I drag down to 0, which means the ball is going to be sitting right on the edge of the stage, but I want to move it off stage, so I'm going to drag down just a little bit more so that it matches the beginning point. And now let me close the motion editor and see what kind of path we've created. We can see the X line change in the hard solid line, and even when we have the bounce easing applied, we can see that the direction is going to change with the ball from the dotted lines on our screen as well. Since our backboard has disappeared, I can see we're going to have to add a few more frames to those spans. So let's open up our timeline and back up just a little bit. And we can definitely see that our rim and our backboard disappear before they're supposed to. So let me just click at the end of each one of those frames, and I'll press F5, and we'll make sure that the durations match. I'll do that for the rim layer as well. And now we can go and look at our animation and see if it actually looks like it hits the backboard. I'll back it up here just a little bit, and it kind of comes in. Now, we can see the point at which it hits. It's a little high, and by rights, it should actually miss the frame. So we have some adjusting to do. Let me center up that portion of the timeline, and I'll just click on the basketball too because that gives us our nice path. Now, just like before, I can still select the motion path and make adjustments to it. We can move it around, and we can even change back over to our transform tool to adjust things. I'm going to tug this out just a little bit here. And again, I'm looking at the dotted lines to see actually where the ball is going to hit. When I get close, I'm just going to preview it and see if that hits in the right spot now. Now it's probably a little bit high, so I'm just going to move the whole animation down. And let's see if we're making it through the hoop now. It's a lot better than before. And we can see how easy it was to make that change inside of our motion editor timeline. That would have been really difficult to do out here because I would have probably messed up all these bouncing keyframes as soon as I started dragging. Now let's see how it all looks at full speed. I'm just going to go use our test movie. And there we can see our bounce pass and the ball going through the hoop. Now there's only one more little detail I want to add, so let me close this down. As usual, we've got a movie clip that we're animating, so let me go over to my selection tool and I'm going to grab a hold of the basketball here. I'm going to double click and we'll go right into the basketball layer. And you'll notice that I have already set it up so that we actually have a ball and the lines separate. I like to get a little 3D in there so the ball has a little highlight on it. And we wouldn't want that spinning around because that would look wrong. But we have a separate layer with lines in it. And all I'm going to do is add a simple tiny little animation of rotating the lines. Let me click and our lines are actually a movie clip. The registration point's in the center. So let's make a motion tween out of it. I'll go down to the rotation for my motion tween and I'll just type in 1 times. We'll hit enter and we're set for clockwise. And that's simply going to give the ball a little bit of rotation or spin here as it's moving. Now let me go down to the end of the ball layer. I'll press F5 and make sure it doesn't disappear. And now we have a nice look of the ball spinning around in space. Of course, this is a movie clip, so that's just going to loop over and over again on our main timeline. And once again, let's just test our movie and see what we've got. Now that little bit of rotation adds just a touch of realism. And we'll close it up. Well, now we've had 3 chapters taking a look at what you can do with motion tweens, and I'm sure throughout all of it, you've gotten a lot of little tips and tricks that you can use in creating your own animations. I would definitely suggest you get in a lot of practice and animate as much as you possibly can. In our next chapter, we're going to find out how to put it all together and learn how to use buttons and ActionScript to create interactivity.